Hello, this is Zoltán Lahovsky from Lombik Technologies Limited. This is a tutorial for Orchard Dojo about how to run the Orchard CMS with IIS and the proper SQL Server on your development machine. We will start by installing Webmetrics. Webmetrics, if you doesn't happen to know, is a nice little tool aiding web development, and even if you're a hardcore developer, it's nice to use Webmetrics to browse an SQL-C database because its database browser is quite nice and easy to use if you have a small data set, and this is something you typically have on your development Orchard instance. So let's install Webmetrics. By the way, it will also install Web Platform Installer, the tool we will use to install other tools during this tutorial, and it will install IIS Express, so the web server we will use to run Orchard, and many dependencies, so to start with Webmetrics is very convenient. And now everything is loaded, so here is the Webmetrics install screen inside Web Platform Installer. So let's install. As you can see, it will install quite a few dependencies. We will need most of them. So really this is a good way to start. Now as you can see, my virtual machine I have set up here is so incredibly fast that the installer has already completed. So that's great. But we are not finished yet. We have now installed an IIS Express together with Webmetrics, but we need something to handle and to edit the configuration of that IIS we have running here. And we will need a tool for that, and that tool is called IIS Manager, or precisely IIS Manager from Remote Administration. So let's install that. And we will see what IIS Manager will provide for us. And this is already done, so great. Let's take a look at IIS Manager. IIS Manager will provide us with some configuration tools for our local IIS. As you can see, this is this machine, it's listed here. It's the only server I have a connection saved in this IIS Manager. And as you can see, it's pretty empty. Also, there is only one site, the default website. This default website is just a welcome splash screen that comes with IIS bundled. So there's pretty much nothing in this IIS yet. We have to install some other components as well. We will need ASP.NET, of course, because Orchard is an ASP.NET application, so we will need it. And we will need not just ASP.NET, but ASP.NET 4.5 or the latest version you have access to at the time you are watching this video. Now, as you can see, I've searched for ASP.NET 4.5, but it's not listed here. Now, the case is that this is a Windows 7 machine, so we don't have .NET 4.5 installed yet. So we have to install that first. I will just go on and install the .NET framework first, and after that we should then be able to install ASP.NET 4.5 as well. And conveniently we need to restart the system, so I will just do that as well. Don't be afraid if you already have .NET 4.5 installed, or even you own a Windows 8 machine, so you don't need to install .NET 4.5. That's not an issue. I'm just finishing up the installation of .NET 4.5, so please stand by for a little more. Okay, so after several restarts, we are back to our Web Platform Installer. Now, previously I've said that that we should install ASP.NET Forward 5. Well, it turns out there is no ASP.NET Forward 5 listed in my web platform installer. That's actually quite strange, because on another machine I have that, but it seems it will work without that extension here for some reason. Anyway, if you are installing a Windows Server operating system and you add roles to that server, you will definitely see and will need the ASP.NET Forward 5 role there. Anyways, we will need some other components. HTTP errors is needed for us. It's already installed. I guess it was installed with WebMatrix. And we will need, or possibly, the URL rewrite. You can use URL rewrite to add URL rewrite, surprisingly, rules to your web config files. So if you use URL rewrites on your sites and you want to test them locally by modifying the web.config file of your Orchard instance, you should definitely install your URL rewrite too. So that was installed. So now we can go back to IIS and add our Orchard website. Here I have an Orchard source. This is the full source. It's 1.6, by the way, because this is the most recent source at the time released. But of course, the technique will be the same with later Orchard versions as well. So let's go back to IIS Manager, and we will add our Orchard website. As you may know, the Orchard solution has many folders, many folders, but there is one, orchard.web, that's the web project. You have to add this web project, because this is the real web application behind Orchard. You have to add this web project to IIS. So we will now go to IIS Manager and add this web project as our website. So we were here before. As you now see, there are several other components installed in our IIS, so this should be sufficient. We will now go to Sites and add a new website. You can give the site a name, so let's call it Orchard Test. An application pool will be created for this website automatically if you don't select otherwise. I would advise you to create an application pool for each of the websites you are testing locally. It's just more convenient this way. You won't experience any performance issues or any issues at all. Now, under physical path, let's go to our Orchard. Also, it's on the desktop, and under source, we select orchard.web. Alright, now we can add a binding. The binding is basically the configuration that tells IIS what it should listen to when it should open up this website. So you can specify a hostname here, and after you start the website, this Orchard instance will be accessible from under that hostname on your local machine. Now there is a neat trick that you can use, and it doesn't need any other sort of configuration like editing the host file of your system, and for that we will use a seemingly global URL that is really a local one, and that URL is like the following. It's kind of localhost, but it looks like a real domain. Anyway, it loops back to our localhost. So if I write Orchard Test here, we will be able to access this website from under this URL in any browser without any further configuration. So let's hit OK. Now our website is added. Let's do one final configuration before we try out this website. Let's go under Application Pools, and you can see that this Orchard Test website was created for some reason with .NET Framework 2.0, so that's wrong. I will just reset this to the latest framework version. As Manage Pipeline mode, integrated should be selected. This is important. And one final note here, you can see there is this identity column. Basically, this tells us how the applications in this application pool are run regarding the Windows user. Now we will reset this to be our own user. Later with SQL Server we will see why this is important. So I'm just going here and we will use a custom account. It will be my user account, so I will just give the username and password here. Oops. Let's try again. Oops. My password is password, so you could probably have guessed that. And of course I have problems with my existence. That's working now. Alright, so everything's okay. And now let's check out our website. So let's go to the browser and open our website up. Now the initial load time will be a bit long, but after a while you should be able to see the setup screen. What is kind of lame on my machine for some reason, because the CSS and JavaScript files are not loaded. For some strange reason on this machine it is this way, but just on the first time. So let's don't get intimidated by this, and let's set up our Orchard website, admin password. And for now we will use an SQL database. Everything else can be the default. So let's wait for our nice Orchard setup. And it indeed works. Here we have our Orchard website. It responds, so everything is great. Now this is really great, but we want a full SQL Server. So we will just go back and install a real SQL Server on our machine. I will just close this, and I will now recycle the application pool of our Orchard Test website, so I can remove the app data folder. The app data folder contains, among others, the SQL database, but we won't need that because we are now installing the SQL Server. So this was just a small cleanup. Now there is a download package for everything you will need for SQL development, and that is called SQL Express 2012 or anything else. Probably there will be a 2013 as well. And advanced tools. This should be it. Yeah, it definitely looks like that. We will now download it. You can select an edition here to download. I would advise you to download the most complete package, and for 64-bit systems this is this one. So this includes basically everything, including SQL Server Management Studio that you will need for Orchard development. So let's download that. Alright. The download is done, of course, in an instant. So let's start the setup. It will take a while, so make sure to prepare some hot coffee or hot chocolate. By the end of the setup it won't be hot anymore, but it will probably make it more enjoyable. After a while you will see this screen, so in the end we can start with the actual installation it seems. Select New SQL Server Standalone Installation, because this is what we want to do. Now comes the usual installer stuff, so let's accept everything and anything. Yes, please also update my SQL Server instance. And begin with the setup. Okay, so here we are. Basically here the defaults are okay unless you want to use local DB. This is not necessary for Orchard development, but of course you can opt with a local DB instance instead of a standard database. But we will just leave it like this for now. Okay, so basically here you can leave everything on the default. It doesn't really matter if you don't have multiple instances of an SQL Server instance on your machine. So that will just be sufficient. And we are waiting again and again. This is also good on the default. All the necessary services are running, or rather will start automatically. Here you can choose to use either Windows authentication mode for SQL Server or mixed mode, where not only Windows authentication but SQL Server authentication is available. Well, it really depends on what you want to do. You could never know, so let's rather select this mixed mode. But you can change this later on, so don't be afraid if you need to use SQL Server authentication later but have chosen Windows authentication here. But if you are installing this now, let's choose mixed mode. Well, since I wanted to use password again, that of course is a very bad choice if you are trying this and not just for a test. I got a validation error. Alright, reporting services can be installed and configured. Okay, let's send reports as well. And wait again. Alright, I can't believe this installation finally finished. So as you can see, everything is a great success. So we are done with installing SQL Server. Now, almost. Before we can start with Orchard, let's do two things. First, let's enable TCP IP connections, because that's not enabled by default for our SQL Server. So let's go to SQL Server Configuration Manager. In SQL Server Configuration Manager, you can really configure everything that's global to your SQL Server instances. Now, under SQL Server Network Configuration, you will see a menu item with protocols for your insert SQL Server instance name here, so SQL Express here, and here you can see which type of connection your SQL Express instance accepts. Now we will need TCP IP for our Orchard instance to work, so let's select yes here. Alright, so we will need to restart the service, the SQL Express service. Luckily we have this SQL Server Services menu item here. As you can see, we have quite a few services running. Here is our SQL Server service. This is the actual SQL Server. So let's restart it. After it is restarted, we will be able to use everything and run Orchard. But before we run Orchard, let's quickly discover our SQL Server, and we will use SQL Server Management Studio here. Yeah, it's the new edition, so let's look at it. Interestingly, it's SQL Server 2012, powered by Visual Studio, but it looks like Visual Studio 2010. I guess there was some interesting design decision behind that. But after it loads, we will be able to see, we will be able to connect to our local SQL server. Alright, we can either connect by the full name of our server instance, or if we have only one instance running, what is the case now, we can just use localhost. Alright, oh yeah, sorry, this we could use localhost if we have chosen the default instance name when installing. We have instead chosen the full name SQL Express, so we have to use this alias here. We have configured Windows authentication as well, so we can use Windows authentication. And now this should work. Yeah, indeed. Here we have our SQL Server instance. We should have some built-in databases, yes. And to run our Orchard instance, we need to create an SQL database, and Orchard will use that SQL database. So let's go here, right-click, new database. Alright, let's call that Orchard test as well. All the defaults will be enough for us for now. Alright, and now let's go back to our IIS manager and open up our Orchard test website. Of course, you don't necessarily need to go to IIS manager to open up the website. If you just visit this URL anytime IIS is started, and it should start with Windows Start, or rather you should be able to start IIS by opening this URL without any other configuration. So you can just visit this URL and open up your website. So let's see the setup screen again, because we should be able to see that soon. Alright, so let's do again Orchard test, admin password again. But now we won't use the built-in storage with our basic SQL Server compact database, but rather a real database. We need a connection string for that. I just happen to have one in the clipboard. This is the familiar SQL connection string you may have used in other .NET applications. Well, the data source, the first parameter for the data source is the address where you can access the database. Now localhost won't work here, so let's just copy this here. So we will use the full name here. Initial catalog, we should specify the database name here. So this is Orchard test, so let's use the same. Oops, random caps lock. And you see we have integrated security set as true here. Do you remember that in IIS Manager, when we set up our website, we also set that for our Orchard test application pool that's running our Orchard test website, we specified the identity to be my user. Now, since this is configured this way, we can use integrated security, but basically means that the connection to the SQL server we use this Windows user. If we would have left this on the default setting, that would mean that we should set up a proper SQL Server user and specify its credentials here in the connection string. For local testing, for data development, this is using integrated security is simply more simple. So I would advise you to use that. You could specify a database table prefix for the Orchard tables, of course. So this is the usual Orchard setup. And after our recipe is cooked, you should be able to see our beautiful new local Orchard test website running from our SQL Server database. So let's see what happens. And there it is. Beautiful. Let's go back to SQL Server Manager just to quickly check what we have done. And indeed, here is our Orchard test database, and you see that we have all the tables that are created by the default installation for Orchard. We have all the tables here, so everything works. Now that was how to set up Orchard locally with an IIS Express and an SQL Express instance. So that should really give you an idea how to start developing with IIS and SQL Server locally. It's pretty straightforward for now. So our website runs. If you open the solution in Visual Studio, you should be able to just modify the source, and because of dynamic compilation, if you modify the source, you should be able to see the changes right after a reload in the browser. Of course, you can also attach a debugger, but in the notes for this video, everything is simply explained with some links included. So you should know how to quickly jump off from this start. So thank you for watching. That was it.